They never went to Harvard or sat on a deacon's bench. They went to church even when it snowed. They didn't ask to be remembered, and they haven't been. Well-behaved women seldom make history.
She's a founding mother of the field of women's history, a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and university professor emerita at Harvard University. So I'm so pleased to welcome my good friend, Professor Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, to AmRev360.
So, you know, that slogan is very much about the people history ignores, the people who don't make a fuss. But of course, it's become a movable slogan. It can mean absolutely anything you want it to mean, and it's a lot of fun.
Anne Boleyn.
It can be Anne Boleyn, or it can be Marilyn Monroe or Eleanor Roosevelt, okay, or Martha Ballard. So I was giving a talk at a community college in Southern California, and a talk on a totally different topic. It was amazing that there were so many students there. They were there, they were attentive, they were wonderful. I gave my talk. And afterwards, a young woman came up to me and said, "Professor Ulrich, I just love your quote. And I wonder if you would mind if I had it tattooed." I looked at her. "What did your mother think?" I said to her. But anyway, it gets me in doors that I wouldn't otherwise get in. People who could care less about history.
Sure thing.
It was 1976, published in American Quarterly, and it was called "Virtuous Women Found." And of course, the first sentence in that article, to my total amazement, 10 years later, was picked up and used as an epigraph in someone else's short history of women. And the internet came along, and suddenly, you know, I'm out there talking about well-behaved women never make history, which was totally strange. By then, by the time that sentence escaped, I became known through A Midwife's Tale, which was my second book. Yes. My first book was on 17th century.
So then you discovered a diary.
Yes.
I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Martha Ballard.
I went up to work on a totally different court case that interested me at the Maine State Library in Augusta. And it was a pretty long trip from where I lived. It took me 10 minutes to find that there was nothing there that I didn't already have. And I thought, I don't want to waste my time. So I pull out my little notebook, and I see that there are a couple of diaries in the Maine State Library right across the hall from the Maine State Archives. And I walked over. One of them was a 20-page typescript. The other just blew me away. 2 fat, bound volumes of these little tiny packets of 27 years of one woman's life in her own handwriting. A woman who was born in 1735. I mean, she could have been one of my good wives that I wrote about, but she didn't start to write in her diary until she moved into Maine during the American Revolution, started working as a midwife. And in 1785, this probably wasn't the first thing she wrote, but the first extant pages are in 1775, beginning on her birthday. She's 50 years old. It affirmed for me things I'd guessed at about women's lives.
There's nothing better than
that,
to be proven right.
I knew they were borrowing and exchanging from one another, but I couldn't quite prove it because all I had were little court cases with snippets of information, and they weren't in account books, and they didn't leave a lot of written records. And so when I started reading what this woman was saying, it wasn't initially midwifery that interested me. I thought I knew quite a bit about that just from other people's work. But pretty soon I knew it was a book.
Now, I know because I saw the movie.
Yeah.
That this is a diary that's not flowery, expository, right? It's a little dry and matter of fact, isn't it?
It is a dry and matter of fact diary until you keep reading. So one thing, 27 years, there's bound to be a little excitement here and there, but my whole approach to history was through the lens of social history. I wanted to know what the community was like, what the structure was like, and I knew that there was a murder in there. I knew that there were some things that had been expurgated from the town history. I didn't know much about them, but I felt like to honor that diary, it had to be the center of the story. And for me, it was the center of the story. I mean, I had spent 5 or 6 years writing a dissertation where I had maybe 5 things in a woman's handwriting. And to see, you know, if I'd have come from the 19th century, where there were stacks of diaries, transcribed diaries, I wouldn't have recognized the value of this. But it's certainly the earliest detailed diary kept by an American midwife. I thought, nobody's going to read this. I'm so obsessive. Nobody else will care about all these details I was recording. But, you know, I felt very good. My editor said, I think you're done. It's time to publish. And I was quite excited. I got a small review in the New York Times.
Of course, this led to your Pulitzer Prize for Midwives Tale.
Yes.
And then I'd love, this was translated into a film, a documentary film, which was very innovative, I think, the approach. Can you tell me about the process? And, the filmmaker that you worked
That was
with?
amazing. I got a phone call one morning from a woman named Lori Kahn who said, I'm working for PBS, The American Experience, and I've been assigned to find topics that are pre-photography. Because, you know, they depend so much on the visual. Pre-photography, I've just read your book. Can I come and talk to you? And Lori is a genius. She's an amazing filmmaker. But this was her first full-scale documentary film. She's done lots of things since. So it was a 5 or 6 year process that was very exciting. I mean, it transformed my work in many ways. I'd always been interested in artifacts and, you know, embroideries and textiles. I'd started working on some of that material, but to have to see something that's only in your head become physical and in front of you was terrifying. Yes. You know, I want to document every last
I thought that was
inch.
that was what was so engrossing about that film. And I've actually waited 22 years to tell you this story.
Okay.
Because my son was born November of 1999. I was primary caregiver. My wife was starting her medical career. And I watched that film sitting with my feverish, little infant on my lap,
Wow.
with a medicine dropper, trying to keep him hydrated, putting water in there. And there's a scene in what's, for our viewers, if you haven't seen the film, what I think is interesting, there's a kind of like two parallel stories. There's your encounter with the diary and how you went about piecing the story together, and then a kind of dramatized version of Martha Ballard's life.
Yes.
And there's a scene where there's sickness in the house, and you talked about how, when the filmmakers, it was all set up really nicely, and you said, unless you've been in a house where there are sick people, you don't realize, you wouldn't see the disorder that would be there. And I felt so connected with you at that, as I was literally living that with this feverish infant on my lap at the time. And I went on to work on a few films, including, a series for PBS. And I just felt that was, it is rare for an academically trained historian to sort of bridge that into the material world.
We just had to solve these problems. Like, if you're going to have an actress, which is pretty brave and pretty amazing to pull that off on a low-budget PBS film. But we found this amazing woman. And one of the conceits of the film was the tension between what you can know and what you can't know. So the film, they remember, if you've seen the film opens beautifully with the actress Kailani Lee, who plays Martha Ballard, getting into her canoe and going across the river in the dark of night and delivering a baby. Yeah. And then the camera focuses on Martha's beautiful face, just radiant that she has performed this delivery. And you hear the voice of the historian saying,
"I don't know what Martha Ballard looked like. I still don't know."
And that was really controversial. Kailani was so upset. She said, "I've worked so hard to become Martha Ballard."
This person,
and then you say that. And I convinced them that was a great way to open the film, because we wanted to play back and forth between documentation. There was so much, and this was Laurie's brilliance. She really wanted to see me taking notes in the diary and letting people know that history doesn't just jump out of a bottle. Mm-hmm. It has to be earned.
So it sounds like maybe that experience on set may have influenced your march toward the Age of Homespun. Is that fair to say?
It absolutely did. I was already working on the Age of Homespun, but it reinforced that interest in the material. Mm-hmm. And the physical, and are there things that artifacts can tell us? I mean, working with set designers, and you see things differently, I think. Mm.
So I'm curious, maybe to bring it all together in a kind of final, wrap-up question. We're looking a few years from now at the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Mm-hmm. We're the Museum of the American Revolution. Mm-hmm. As you think about the various fields, American history broadly, women's history, material culture, do you have any sort of aspirations or dreams for maybe how this might all come together and have some influence on the nation as we reflect on our quarter millennium?
One of the advantages we have, but also one of the perils coming into 2026, is that everybody kind of cares about history right now. They're tearing down monuments, they're voting out school boards, but they're building new monuments and they're starting new collections and they're doing family history in a passionate way. So it's a fraught time and a time of opportunity, I think.